I just want to start off this entire episode with a bit of a preface because it's going to happen at some point in this episode, and we're going to look like fools eventually for it. Because today we're going to be discussing future Hall of Famers and kind of looking at who today's almost guys are. And I know at some point during this discussion we're going to throw out a name, and both either you or I, Dad, or are going to react with absolute shock and derision that that guy could be being suggested as a future Hall of Famer, only for that guy to make it in and make us look very stupid. It's
Yeah,
going to happen.
I think that you're right. We will look bad, and there will be guys that won't get in that we might think are going to get in that have a really good chance, right? And then there are guys that we're talking about. Oh, he has no chance, and will shock us.
And I think the thing that you guys, one, there's a lot of 10-year vet guys that have 10 years that you would be surprised have 10 years in the major leagues because you don't think of them that way. And so there's going to be guys that we're going to say, like, yeah, he's got the Hall of Fame resume already. And you're going to be like, wait, really? Like, if he just stopped playing today, he could make it? Yes. And it's not guys just named Mike Trout.
Right,
There's
and he should probably be in that first category we're going to talk about, because
of
I basically made the list up of guys that had played at least 8 years in the league. Now it takes 10 to be in the Hall of Fame, but these guys, even through maybe 8 years, well, not maybe, but 8 years, have distinguished themselves as maybe being on a track. So they're not there necessarily. We have a group of those players.
your Juan Sotos of the world are very likely on a Hall of Fame track,
But
but
he's
he's
not
not
even
going to
on
be.
the 8 year list.
He's not even on the 8-year list, so he's just not going to be. I'm just bringing up sort of an example of
Great,
guys that
great.
won't be coming up in this discussion
And he
today
better
because
stop hitting 182 also if he wants to get back on that track.
I mean, if he just plays in Mexico City the rest of the year, he'll be fine.
How about that place? So I started by saying, okay, there are four certainties, right? And I generally think everybody would say there are no doubters, right, that are playing this season.
Right. I think there's four people that would be universally agreed upon as no doubters, and then there's going to be some other people that are no doubters to others, but I don't think they would be as universal yet. Whereas these four, I think it would be laughable to suggest that any of them would not get in the Hall of Fame. Any of them won't be first ballot guys.
And it signifies, I don't know if it signifies a golden year of pitchers that we didn't think was happening. But when you think Kershaw, Scherzer, and Verlander as certain Hall of Famers, I don't get any doubt about it. They're three out of the four are pitchers, and then so what's left behind? And that's kind of interesting in another conversation to think, okay, after that, who do you got? So
Who do you got? Oh, yeah, the only guy to win the Triple Crown in like the last 50 years or something in Miguel Cabrera.
right. So I mean, Miggy definitely in. So those four guys, I think we talk about them a lot. I don't think we need to talk about them a tremendous amount.
Right. By virtue of what we were saying, there's no need to kind of go over their careers just from the perspective of they're going to be Hall of Famers. Anybody suggesting that they're not going to be is deluding themselves, let's be honest.
Would you
All,
think that Max Scherzer could now be known as Max Sticky Finger Scherzer? That'd be a cool nickname to get late in your career.
I don't think he would appreciate it, certainly.
I think he'd laugh, actually.
I think he left. But I will say what's interesting about the pitchers and the hitters in this comparison is while you've got three certainty at pitchers, past that, there's not a lot of guys. There's not a lot of options once you go past those three. Whereas there's a whole lot of hitters that could be in the Hall of Fame coming up. Like there's a ton of guys that have put together really impressive careers that might even kind of force how we evaluate Hall of Famers to get adjusted just because what you can expect from a career stats per like are you going to say if this is a Hall of Fame there's a lot of guys that should be in the Hall of Fame now?
Well, and we think that there should be actually,
Right.
And so that right. I'm not sure that even if you start putting guys in the way that we have said we want to, you're still going to run out of candidates to a certain degree. You have guys that are on tracks, but at eventually, look, there's only one pitcher. I think. Well, there's only a couple of pitchers that are at the very very end of their career in Greinke and Wainwright. Right. So and I would consider Greinke a better candidate than Wainwright.
I would tend to agree with that. I feel like and that's what's going to hurt Wainwright is that there's a lot of other starters in this era that you would have considered better than him at all points of his career, and his biggest selling points are his longevity and the fact that he played his entire career with the Cardinals.
Well, and we know how that matters. We're going to do a whole episode on playing your whole team, as 20% of the Hall of Fame players voted in played their whole career with the same team. And I just think that's really interesting that it overweights, that aspect. But Wainwright was also a very good postseason pitcher, so in his favor there.
Right.
We don't talk about, but you're right in terms of the all-time stats, right? When his all-time whip is 1.21, I'm not even talking about WAR at this point, not unimportant. ERA plus of 118, strikeouts 2,100. He didn't even get to he'll get to the 200 wins this year because he's got 195 against only 117 losses. But one-loss records are not thought of the same way that they were. So I don't see any of those all-time stats on his resume that would say this guy's a surefire Hall of Famer.
Also, a big part of the issue with the win-loss thing is Cy Young had more losses than wins. So, but he's a Hall of Famer.
No. He didn't. No. He had more losses than wins. What are you saying?
No. But he had like an amazing amount of losses.
He had over 300 losses, and I think he had like 300 complete game losses or something crazy like that.
Right. It was a huge number of losses in his career. So it's going to be like, oh, okay, I don't. Yeah, he had 511 wins, 315 losses.
Right.
And so like that's a lot of
decisions.
That's a lot. Right. That's a lot of decisions.
That's a lot of decisions.
That's a lot of decisions. And I mean, like, it's hard for me to believe that, like, oh, okay, like, that the win, and it's like nobody ever quotes the number of losses when you quote these things. It's just how many wins the guy has. Oh, he had 300 something wins in his career. You never give the win loss record.
And the last thing on Wainwright, and I think you asked that question, did he have any Cy Youngs before? And he finished second twice and third once. And got MVP votes in 5 seasons, has 2 Gold Gloves and 1 Silver Slugger. So he's a multi-talented guy, and of course the hitting doesn't matter anymore. But he was one of the better hitting pitchers for sure.
Right, and he was a good fielder, and but he's
right.
just. I think he's the prototypical Hall of Very Good pitcher. But I think he has a better chance than most guys in getting in on this list because he played his whole career for the Cardinals, and that's going to give him a very strong lobbying base to push him into the Hall of Fame. Not that necessarily like, oh, he doesn't deserve it, but rather you're just way more likely to have people pushing for you because you played your whole career with this one team.
So we talked about this. Let's say it's 20 years from now. Wainwright doesn't get in. Right, he misses it. He doesn't get voted in, and old Scott Rowland is on the Veterans Committee, and he's like, Waino was great, man. You got to vote for Waino. And
he was good from when he was a rookie in 2005, 2006, and he struck out Beltran.
This has been going on in Hall of Fame voting as long as been Hall of Fame voting. Is you get an advocate, and that's the kind of thing that could happen to a guy like Wainwright. So I don't know that he'd get in, in this particular round, but I wouldn't say never for a guy like that.
One of the things that'll probably benefit him is he'll get some years on the ballot potentially that don't have Scherzer, Kershaw, and Verlander on there.
He's got to hang on for a few more years. They're all retiring though. He's right,
but
he can't retire before them.
I'm going to say, like, it's probably his last year too, but that's the kind of thing you got to think for him. Like, if he retires and then Verlander and Scherzer pitch another year, he at least gets 1 year where he's not competing against them.
They'll only be on there 1 year or so.
Right, exactly. They'll both come immediately off.
Exactly. So there are other guys though that I put into the pitchers category, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. And as Met fans and Jacob deGrom fans, and the most recent news distressing that he's back on the injured list, but he needed to do what in order to be there. We already know he's got all-time numbers in certain aspects.
He needed another 3 seasons of counting stats, and I think that ultimately he's just gonna lose too many years in his career to pitching injuries, that especially because he came up late and he didn't start pitching until later in his age, that he's just not gonna have. You can't put the pitcher he was when he was healthy in the Hall of Fame.
Right. And then to another Met fan I put on here because they mentioned him that he's coming up soon is David Wright. The same thing, right? Like really excellent baseball player, just needed to do it longer to make
right.
And I think deGrom probably had more impact on the game than David Wright did when he was at his best.
Because David Wright was maybe the best third baseman in the National League
outside
at
of Scott Rowland.
at various points, depending on who you were. There was no question Jacob deGrom, when he was on,
Right.
was the best pitcher in baseball.
Right. So the other guys on there, and I threw a couple of relievers on there. The first one was the guy I kind of felt was stronger when I think about it. How about Kimbrel? What
He's
is
got the how many career saves does he
well,
have?
and then we have to get into a whole saves discussion as to is that
Just
really
but just
important?
starting there, but like before we go any
397.
397. He'll get 3 more, so I'll have
He'll
400.
get 400 saves for sure.
So to me, Kimbrel will get in because we valued saves for so long in a certain way, and getting 400 saves like that, you're not gonna keep him out because we now look at saves differently.
I agree with that, except and I will make this caveat. You know, a really good big time big game performer. Billy Wagner isn't in the Hall of Fame. Billy Wagner has more saves, has thrown more innings, has a lower WHIP, a higher strikeout rate. And so to me, I like Kimbrel, and I think they should both be in probably because
Right.
you got to put some relievers in there.
I think that's the thing. Both of them should be in. Wagner should be in, and then Kimbrel should be in, and then we should be quibbling over whether Jansen should be in, probably.
Right. And I put Jansen on there too. And I feel less
I feel less
enamored of
strongly
that.
about him.
I like his story, and that he started as a catcher and became this outstanding reliever. I'm less, but he's a guy I put on that. Okay, I guess if he does some things of the rest of his career that would surprise us a little bit, he has to be the Mike B guy, right? In my opinion, I don't know.
Right. He's the
Weaker,
maybe guy.
weaker, right? And then the only other guy I had, well, two guys I had there, is Chris Sale, and I kind of feel like his star is fading every day.
He's just missed again, he's another guy that's just been injured too much. He's missed multiple full seasons, I think, due to injury.
Yeah,
And it just
not
feels
that you
like
count the reasons why, but he's got some bizarre reasons why he's injured sometimes.
right, the why doesn't matter. It's just that he's been injured, and that there's just not much you can do about that. Like, you feel bad because had he not been, he'd probably have a very strong case for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I would think so too. He's got the hardware to prove it. He's been the best pitcher on championship teams. I count that for something. He hasn't played his whole career for the same team because obviously he came up with the White Sox, not the Red Sox. But I think all this he's got to have his own turnaround, like Jacob deGrom, and all of a sudden find 2 years, 3 years of outstanding pitching, and then you might go, well, now okay, he's done that, but it doesn't seem that way for either of those guys. And then the other guy I put on there is a guy who's having a great season and had his own bout with sticky finger, accusations and stuff like that. Is Garrett Cole, and I heard like somebody talking about him this week. Going, well, he's like a surefire Hall of Famer. He doesn't have to do much more. And you start, I'm like, really? Could he be that good?
You start looking, and it's actually much more impressive than you realize.
Right. He just hasn't. This is his 11th season. Right. So he's not there, but he's pitching at such a high level. And at age 32, I think it's reasonable to expect, without injury, 4 or 5 more excellent years from Garrett Cole. And that
Right.
will put him, there.
And you're also gonna have to think all of these guys from this era, you essentially have to understand that their career stats are going to be a little lower than their peers, than their historical peers a lot of the time, because they lost half of a season, like they lost 2/3 of an entire season.
It's not only that. I think that's a really excellent point. It's that the way starting pitchers are used today to compare to the way they used to be, they just won't pitch as many innings in any given season. We know that. We talked about that.
So you have to more look at their
strikeouts still for today's generation pitcher, a number we should be thinking about, or is 25
I think we should be
the number?
I think you're looking at K per 9.
Right. Like which these guys are crazy good at that.
Right, and looking at K per 9 and then your innings thrown is going to tell you a lot, because you might if you've got a pitcher with an elite K per 9 and he's throwing a good amount of innings per season, 180 to 200 innings, that's going to be big for you. Then you're going to.
Cole is a horse, obviously, and he's almost got 2,000 strikeouts. So 3,000 strikeouts is not out of reach for that guy.
Not at all.
Not at all. So I'd like to see that because the old guy in me is like all these things that used to be important in terms of gross numbers in a player's career are starting to fade, a little bit away. We don't, 300 wins, that doesn't really matter. 20 wins for the pitcher, not that important. That kind of stuff. Hitting 20 home runs used to mean something. Yeah, now that's, he's a lower in the order hitter. So
20 home runs isn't like what are you doing besides hitting 20 home runs? Like that's how people kind of look at it.
Let's do the hitters and whip through those, and then we have a couple other quick fun categories of guys that you think about and you're like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
So I have Joey Votto near the top of my list. I don't think anybody would argue as he is a consideration. I think he's there.
And if anything, you think the whole thing we were giving Wainwright is big credit for, the fact that he's stuck his whole career with the Reds is because especially people are going to feel bad for him.
Yeah.
That's going to help. People are going to feel bad. That guy had to languish and baseball fans love the sad sack loser. The guy
or the lovable. I mean, Joey Votto's just a great.
Right, and I'm not saying Joey Votto is a sad sack loser, but baseball fans love the romantic narrative of this incredible baseball player spending his entire career languishing on this awful franchise. To them, that's like almost like a romantic thought of like, oh, he stuck by them through thick and thin.
He's a true. Well, I would say that Ralph Kiner would be a good example of that. He had a short career, led the league in home runs. I don't know if you know much about Ralph Kiner's playing career, all for the moribund Pirates. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's like, and he got in the Hall of Fame because he was a great ball player, but he also played for those lovable losers, and there was a romantic aspect of that, I think, in him.
I think it's a little bit less today, but I think people will look back the same way people look back on Helton being like, it's not really Todd Helton's fault that he played for the Rockies.
Yeah. How can you blame him, right?
Right. Like,
was I wrong to put Bryce Harper here?
No.
Okay. So we don't need to talk that much about it. You think he's on that track too?
Yeah. The only thing that could hurt him is that he could end up as an injury guy. Like if he doesn't come back and start putting up some, like if he doesn't come back from this injury, then it just becomes hard because he too has missed a ton of time.
I don't know why I don't expect that to happen with him. And I think the idea of them moving him to first base potentially doesn't bode well for Rhys Hoskins because I think they're not going to re-sign him if they're going to move Harper to first.
It's just concerning to me because it's hard for me to understand how playing first base would be such a difference on him than playing the outfield.
Well, you just don't have to throw with his offense.
And then and if that's just they're concerned about the arm thing, then I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, with the way the guy can hit, there's a part of me that thinks that's probably not a terrible idea.
Right, just put him at first base. He can catch the balls. He'll pick up scooping and playing defensive first base quick because he's a competitive guy. And then if you get an extra 3 seasons out of him of quality, batting, it's totally worth it.
I put another guy on here that I don't think most people think about might be on a Hall of Fame track. He's played 11. This is his 11th season. He now plays for the San Diego Padres. And his career numbers are very good, particularly given the position that he plays, shortstop, for the most part. And that's Xander Bogaerts. What do you think about that?
Right, I think that he's one of these guys that you're going to hear his name and you're going to be like, wait, he's on a Hall of Fame track? And also, wait, he's played 11 seasons?
Right.
And so I think that's the kind of thing that where you look at where he is in his 11th season, what like when you start looking at his career stats, they're actually pretty impressive, especially when you take into account he's a shortstop. I think that's the biggest
30.
Right. So he's going to have
30.
at least another 3 or 4 seasons.
3 or 4? They signed him for 11.
Right, but you're expecting 3 or 4 more seasons of elite level production.
I would say, well, maybe not as a shortstop, but I could see at some point when he's 34, maybe moving to third base or something like that. I don't know how long.
Right, and then you get another 3 seasons of really solid production. But when you look at what he's doing right now, you go, okay, yeah. I mean, the guy's got a career 290 average, 36 WAR, and 160 home runs playing the shortstop position. Probably the biggest knock against him is I don't think he's ever won a Gold Glove. He's got 5 Silver Sluggers, though.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody would consider him a dominant. I think he's a slightly above average shortstop, probably would say. That
Right,
no
and
shame in that.
his candidacy for the Hall of Fame might as much be due to the relatively weak crop of shortstops since the Jeter era as anything else.
Well, yeah, you've got other guys. We'll talk about this anyway. I feel like he's on the track, and the best thing about him is that Bogarts could have another 6-7 years of really high production. Would have his home run numbers likely into the mid 300s to 400, and as a middle infielder doing that and having
I
a
don't think he would
plus at
get to
120, he's going to be a Hall of Fame.
not no wait, slow your roll here. There's no way he's getting into the mid 300s to 400s when he's played 11 seasons and hit a career 162 homers.
Here's why I say that I think he will, because he's much more of a home run hitter now than he was early
He
in
hit
his career.
15 last season.
Yeah, what the hell happened last year?
He had 23 the year before.
Right, I guess I think of him as a 25 homer guy, and he's not. He only hit
He
25
had
homer one time.
one time that he had that unbelievable 2019 for Boston where he had 33 homers, and he's never done that. So I think he could finish in the 250 to 300 range if
You
he
don't
has it.
think
Because
he could average 20 home runs a year for another 5-6 years? I think he could. Yeah. In any event,
he
for a
could.
middle infielder, if you get towards 400, now you're at the Jeff Kent level. And then you look at Bogarts and you think, is he a better ball player overall than Jeff Kent down the road? And that will be that kind of an argument. We think Kent should be in too, for that matter.
Right. But yeah, just so for him to just so you get the numbers though, for him to get to 400 homers, he would have to hit 60 home runs for the next 4 seasons.
Or I think he could play 8 seasons. He's signed for like a 10 or
Right.
11. What
Well,
if he
and
played
he'd
8
have
or
to hit
9
he'd have to hit 30 home runs a season for 8 seasons to
to
get to 400.
get to 400? Yeah, I said 350, 400. So
Right, but like just think that's a lot. He's hit
yeah,
30
that's more
runs at his
production than he's showing. You're right. You're right.
right. But I think still
I
he'd be a
overstated on that.
shortstop
Okay.
finishing in the 250 to 300 range. There's not a lot of company that's done that. There's like one other guy who we're going to talk about.
So let's go down a couple of Cardinals. Goldschmidt and Arenado, both are guys we've talked about as they're kind of on the train.
Right. Both of them, and I think the guy that we're also going to talk about him right after that, barring some career-ending injury, and even in the case that the other guy's Mike Trout, and Mike Trout probably, even if like his career just ended today,
He's
he's
in.
in.
He's in.
We just didn't list him as a certainty because he's so far from retiring,
Right.
but he's in. His career stats are unbelievable. But Goldschmidt and Arenado, I think they'll get in, barring some
I say Arenado's got a better chance than Goldschmidt.
just because of the defense.
The defense at that position, and Goldschmidt needs to have a high level of production at the advancing age now, that he's got to have a few 30 home run seasons, and I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that and bat 300.
Right, because he came on very late in his career.
Right. He's a late starter, but not to say that he can't do it. So
no,
that's why he's there. And the same thing, much to my hard to write his name down, is Freddie Freeman. Right?
It's easier now that he's in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and he just, every time I see that guy, he's killing my team somehow. He is, a guy also playing first base that, because it's first, you almost have to overcome the fact that you play first base.
Right, like, because there's all these guys that are playing, because it's like first base is where you stick the best hitter on the team that can't field.
If I picked one stat for Freddie Freeman, and I'll say that says why I think he's a Hall of Famer, it's his career ops plus in this is his 14th season of 140.
Right, that's just career OPS plus a 140. The guy means the guy is hitting and raking. What's his career average? Is it over 300?
298 for his career.
That's pretty good.
So
300, 350 homers?
He only has 296, and I say only because I think for earlier in his career, he wasn't quite the power hitter that he became. And last year, he hit only 21 moving over to the Dodgers.
But he'll finish with 300 something, 350 probably.
Yes. And I think he's got a really good
He could even hit he could hit 400 even.
And he'll maintain the average. He's a clutch player, a good defensive first baseman, just can't get hurt, but I think he'll make it. And I think Manny Machado They were never teammates, right? But his division rival now. I think he's got a really good chance too, and he's pretty young.
Right. He's still got a bunch of years left, but I think he's got a pretty good shot at making it. I think because he's really the other third baseman. But I think there's only one other guy you'd say besides Arenado, oh, that would really make it here.
Okay, I think I know who you're thinking about.
Right. And I think that he kind of is like Jose Ramirez
Right,
is starting to get close to there.
right. I
When
put
you
him in there because I think, well, how long has he done it for? And the first thing that came to mind was longer than I thought.
right. You don't realize he's been doing
This
this
is his
for
11th year.
hmm
So,
and
and he doesn't have any of the sexy numbers yet for a career, other than the consistency that he displays through his career. And you think
mhm.
about since 2017, 29 homers, 39 homers, 23 homers, skip the pandemic year where he still hit 17 in 20, 36 homers, 29 homers. Man, that's good.
Right. And with a good average, just consistent.
279 career average, 355 on base, ops plus of 129. He needs more years of
He
this kind
needs
of
more
production.
years, but I think he's got a good shot because he's really the last third baseman in my mind that's got a good shot at getting in like right of like the older guys in the league right now.
I agree. And I'd say he'd be the last third baseman as well, except I have to ask you about another one I put on here, and people are going to go, what? And when I put Evan Longoria's name on there.
And I think that unfortunately for him, he's sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum as David Wright, where David Wright is a guy that would have maybe been in had he had more time to play and his career wasn't shortened by injuries. Longoria is a guy that's only in the conversation because of how long he's played, I think. And that's allowed him to accumulate the counting stats that make him seem like a Hall of Fame candidate.
Well, and of course, had he remained a Tampa Bay Ray for his entire career and had reached the point he is now, where this is his 16th season in the major leagues, with the 333 home runs for his career, 1,100 RBIs, I think he'd have a better chance. And he's got
Oh,
gold gloves, I think 3 gold gloves to his credit.
mhm.
So it is just the fact that he was never thought of as the best third baseman in his league, much less the game. I think at any point during his career.
He was an up and comer, but then he was a good player, maybe the best player on some of those Rays teams, but
But his all time stats are going to make him part of the conversation.
right.
And he checks our box for averaging almost 3.5 WAR or plus per year for his career, with a 120 ops plus, playing a well above average third base. You got to talk about it. You got to talk.
He deserves to be in the conversation
Right,
at least.
right, right. But I think that it's not going to get better, and the longer he plays, the more diluted his stats become. I think that's what.
Exactly, because he just becomes, oh well, he did this over this many years. It's not nearly as impressive.
So I put Altuve there because I think Altuve is so much closer to the Hall of Fame than people think.
I think people just don't want him to be there, but he is going to make it in because he's the only second baseman.
Yeah,
Like
and he does
he's the
everything
only
you want a second
he's the
baseman to do and more, right? He feels his
right,
position. He hits for
steals
power. He's got a
bases.
career average over 300, ops plus of 128, on base, stolen bases. What do you want the guy to do?
Right, and there's no other second
And
baseman.
he played his whole career with Houston. Just to
Yeah.
add a little bit more.
I just think that his lack of positional because if you don't put an Altuve in, you might not put a second baseman in for like 40 years.
That's a well, Chase Utley, he's coming up, so
If Utley should make it in. I'd be
yeah, I think
surprised if
so.
Utley doesn't make it. But like, if you might not, when would you get the next one if you don't put Altuve in?
That's a really good point. It's a
Because
really good point.
I can't think
I
of
can't think of
another
another one who's
close.
serving.
There's guys that are at the beginning of their career that might make it there. If Andres Jimenez plays second like he did last year for 15 years, he'll be a Hall of Famer.
That's all you got to do.
Yeah, just do it for 15 years. But yeah, I
Just
think
do it
that's
for another
something.
15 years.
I think
Um,
that's something people got to consider.
You put you mentioned, because I had forgotten this name, Mookie Betts on there, and of course you're right.
He's another guy he's like, oh, he's played 10 seasons. I didn't realize that.
Right. I think that's what happened. This is his 10th year, so he's now Hall of Fame eligible with, okay, we don't want to talk too much about wins above replacement, but when a number pops out like that, and it's not just the 133 career ops plus, and he's
Which
got
is pretty
gold
good.
gloves up the yin yang in the outfield, so he does it both ends. He plays second base and outfield, which is crazy. Not anything other than the 56.8 career WAR in just over 10 seasons, averaging 5.6 WAR plus a season. Are you kidding?
Yeah, it's just like Mookie Betts would get talked about as a generational player a lot more if he did not play baseball at the same time as Mike Trout.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just
Because it's like because
yeah.
Mookie's got a 56 WAR in 10 seasons and basically 9 seasons is pretty unbelievable until you get to Trout, who's got 83 and 13.
Well, which is why we say he's already there. And I think Mookie Betts just, like if he plays another year or two.
Yeah, he's in that conference because he's got the career stats then. And I think that like the only other guy, I think the only shortstop, I think, and I think this is the guy that's going to give Bogart some most trouble, is you got Lindor. And I think Lindor has the career stats that he's got a very good chance of making it in because shortstop's also somewhat thin position.
I'll give you three others then in that same position. Trey Turner, who's probably the least accomplished in terms of his career because he's not played that many seasons yet.
Mm-hmm.
How many has he played? He's played, well, this is his 9th season. So,
Lindor's played only 9 too.
Right.
This is
So I
Lindor's
think
9th
more
season.
than 8. So Carlos Correa, what? Hey, you know what?
He'll be in the he'll get in the conversation.
So he's also in his 9th season. And then Corey Seager.
I think Correa's biggest issue is that if the injury concerns come to light and he doesn't he only plays like 11 seasons or something, he just might not have the resume to get enough traction. He might just be
all those players are sort of in their all 9-year pros.
Right.
Right. So they all have done a lot of amazing things on the baseball field. They need to do it for a while longer to make them as strong a candidate, as some of the other guys we've talked about.
Exactly.
So, and I guess the last 3 guys I have on here is Salvador Perez, which we talked about in a recent podcast when we talked about catchers. And I think he's like the horse that's trying to come from the back of the pack at the end of the race to catch up and pass the other guys.
Right.
Career
slowly getting up there.
Right. He's 34 or something like that. Still playing a great defensive catcher, as he pointed out. The pitch clock has maybe helped him as a catcher because he's only catching for 2 hours and 20 minutes instead of 3 hours now, or whatever it is. So he's like easier on the knees, but he needs to keep catching and he needs to keep raking. But I think he's somebody that
he has another 2 seasons of catching, and then he transitions into a DH hybrid role where he catches a little bit less, but puts up another 2-3 seasons of quality hitting. He'll have a very good chance of getting in because, like Altuve at second base, there's not a lot of other catchers from this era that are going to get any traction.
Whereas the other 2 guys are teammates, and I want you to tell me I don't know if you looked at the stats, between these 2 guys, who has a better chance of the Hall of Fame with that if you didn't have to look at anything? Aaron Judge or Giancarlo Stanton?
Judge.
Why?
He doesn't get hurt all the time.
At bat?
Doesn't get hurt all the time.
That you would win on that one. Stanton's played more. This is his 14th year. And if I said, so how many, if you didn't look, how many career home runs? Judge has 226, and this
I guess Stan's got like 380.
Yeah, 382.
Wow.
Right.
That was pretty. That's a good
1,000 RBIs, 980.
That's a good guess.
That's impressive. Career average of 264. Well, he never was an average hitter. He's got the MVP. But what takes away, I think, on Stanton's, because he gets hurt. He doesn't give you defense, really. He DHs or he plays a, below average, you'd say, outfield when he does at this point.
Generally.
Yeah. So, he might need to get to one of those all-time numbers. Like he's got to get 500 home runs.
Right.
Right. If he does that, now that would mean that he's going to have another 118 home runs. And can he stay
That means he's probably put together another 3-4 really
three,
good
4 years at age 33? That's possible, but he gets hurt.
But he gets hurt, which is why I picked Judge, because even though Judge has played less than him, he has gotten hurt before. I don't think he gets hurt nearly as he doesn't get hurt nearly as much as Judge as Stanton, it feels like.
I think the number for Judge that gets me at 8 years in this league is the career ops plus of 162.
Right.
So, those kinds of numbers are so rare, people don't understand. And his on base plus slugging just purely is 973 for his career. So, anybody that has an on base plus slugging close to 1,000, and plays 10 years,
that basically means the guy has a good chance of scoring every time he comes up to bat. What do you think about it?
So I think Judge, I would agree, has the better chance because he's got more years to play, more than anything else. Okay, so here's two categories. I have one called interesting but no. Okay, and then played a long time but no.
So right. Where interesting but no is like you're like, oh yeah, maybe, but no. And I think there's a lot of guys that kind of fill into this. And I think these are kind of more of the traditional, like there's a couple of guys that I would say traditional injury cases in here where if it's like, well, if they had played their full career, they would be in it, but no, they did not.
I think you're right when you think about the list. I didn't think of it in that context in terms of injury affecting, but the first three guys, Mad Bum, Anthony Rendon, and Strasburg, and Rendon is further away from a productivity standpoint, but he had a great start to his career and then is injured now. So he's got more ground to cover. Strasburg was on the track. He was.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, 100%.
Mad Bum was on the track. He was. But they're not, I don't think, at this point. Aroldis Chapman, the closer, the dominant guy with the saves, but is he a Hall of Fame closer?
No, because if you're going to tell me that Craig Kimbrell and Kenley Jansen aren't Hall of Fame closers, there's no way Aroldis Chapman is a Hall of Fame closer.
And Jose Abreu has put together a nice career, considering that he didn't get to play here for probably the first half of his career, for all we know. So he's got some decent career numbers. He's got the MVP and all that stuff, but no,
he just doesn't have enough of any of those numbers.
I actually looked at George Springer and thought he was better for his career. I looked at his career numbers, and he's had a nice career, but there's nothing that sticks out in anything.
I feel like I would never look at a Hall of Famer and describe them as having a nice career.
Right. Well, I guess I thought that he had years where he, was an MVP candidate, and he only finished 7th in the MVP one time. He's won 2 Silver Sluggers. This is his 10th season. He's still relatively young, but at 33, I don't see him putting up any kind of career numbers that would get him there. So I just threw him on there because I guess I thought he was better than he was.
Yeah. And I think like Trevor Story, who's another guy that like could be in a different world, but he's just got too much stronger competition.
Yeah, and the good start was just that.
Right. It was just a good start.
It was just a good start. I don't think, and not playing in Colorado, it probably hurts his career stats that he needed that.
Right. And then I think a guy that's interesting is Real Muto. He's a guy that if he has another bunch of seasons of elite stats hitting, he could make it in, honestly. He's the one guy in this interesting but no list, I think, that actually has a shot.
I love this player, by the way, and he plays for, Mets, biggest rivals, the Phillies and all that stuff.
Yeah.
What a player. He played for the U.S. in the World Baseball Classic. Just everything about this player I like.
I think he's got the best chance of all the interesting but no guys.
Right, and I threw Marcus Semien on there, and I guess it's not terrible. He's in his 11th year. He's only 32, got a big contract. I guess he could go nuts and average 25 homers a year down in Texas for the next.
And if he does that, he's got a shot because the second base competition is the pool is so small to pull from that he'll almost get shoved up because it'll be easier, especially if you like Altuve gets in quick. And now you're like the Hall of Fame committee is looking at it and being like, oh, well, if we don't put, who else is there to put? Nobody.
So he's got 191 home runs. So if he gets to 300 plus home runs, there you go again. Second baseman with 300 home runs. You'd think that would be something that would get people's attention,
right?
And the last 4 guys are definitively not Hall of Famers, but they've played a long time in the major leagues. And I went and looked at their career stats and was surprised that probably of these 5 guys, the one that surprised me the most was Elvis Andrus, right? Because you thought, well, why would he be even on there? But
he just played a lot.
are better than you think.
Right, but better than I think compared to what?
Right, right.
You're better than I think in my comparison to the type of player I thought Elvis Andrus was, or better than I think in compared to the average, major
Right.
league.
Well, as a middle infielder, he gets past. So batting 269 for your career batting average is more than okay for a middle infielder. It was the 339 career steals. That's okay. So that's pretty unusual. But there's nothing else about his offensive performance. He was and is a very good defensive player. Well above average.
Very good defender, but I just think that he's just a guy that played a lot of years.
And so is these other four guys. Carlos Santana.
Mm-hmm.
Nelly Cruz, he's got the 400 career home runs, so that's sort of like a little flashing light around
He's
him.
the era of Dave. This era is Dave Kingman.
Yeah, exactly. But no, Charlie Blackmon had a nice career, has played it all with the Rockies, so we know they'll retire.
But that'll really hurt a fringe case guy like him.
Yes. And a Connecticut native who's just played a lot of years, whose career stats. This surprised me because he played a long time. He's had some good years, right? Charlie Morton, not so much. And this is to say that like the career stats belie what I think has been a better career than his career stats.
Really spend a bunch of years playing for those awful pirate teams.
That is true. And this is his 16th season in the major league. So, he's had a chance to, accumulate stats, and his second half of his career is probably way more successful, obviously, because he played for better teams.
Right.
But there's nothing there that said, okay, this guy just was a major leaguer, really good pitcher.
It'd be like you telling me Rich Hill's a major league. Like he's going to be a Hall of Fame.
I didn't put Rich Hill on this list, which is, we love Rich Hill, but not even.
We're not even going to waste your time with that one.
Could come up with other guys that we thought about that are playing, but that's a lot of guys you're watching right now that I don't think when you go to a game or you watch on
you think about them as future Hall of Famers.
Right. Like, am I watching a Hall of Famer?
But we really only talk about future Hall of Famers when a guy is getting on an age enough to be talking about retirement.
Right. And the four guys right now who are, I guess, let's see, Kershaw's in his last year, I think, right? Is he
I think so. I'm not sure. They're not, I don't get the sense they're not treating it like a farewell tour for him this year so far. People aren't talking about how it's Kershaw's, especially because he's been so good.
Right.
But I could also, he's the also type of guy I could see just being like, you know what, I'm done after any given season.
I think Scherzer and Verlander obviously are supposed to pitch beyond this season, health permitting. Miggy's done after this year, as is
right.
Right. So those are the 4 guys or 5 guys you should watch because you may not see him next year.
Exactly.